call to order.
Thank you, Dr. Brand. Paul Rugario,
Here.
Diane Allen,
Here.
John Holloway, Greg Bendel,
Here.
Kevin Kyra,
Here.
Kate Bissell,
Here.
Stacy Scott,
Here.
Christine Holloran,
Here.
Alice Brown LeGrand,
Here.
Lou
Smigler?
Semiglia, Susan Inman,
Here.
Paul Melorani,
Here.
David Ragsdale,
Here.
Marianne Galezzo,
Here.
Michael Camosio, Craig Minor,
Here.
Maggie Lopez,
Maggie is no longer on.
Christine Prendergast, Justin Couchet,
Here.
Dr. Brand,
Here.
and myself. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And just as a note for everyone, we,
Did you get Dennis Kelly?
I signed in,
But yeah, you weren't called on roll call.
just as a note, reminder for those that are both here in person as well as remotely, that, again, thank you to WCTV, who is supporting our meetings and making this accessible to the residents of Wilmington, and thank you for those folks who helped with the technical aspect as we try a hybrid approach for our meeting this evening, and with the hope that this works out seamlessly for everyone. We'll certainly entertain the idea of moving forward with this as a meeting format. The second item of business tonight is the approval of minutes from our February 5th meeting, and looking for a motion to approve.
Actually, Dr. Brand, I'd
Yes.
like to make an amendment to the minutes. I'd just like to amend the minutes to reflect that I arrived at the meeting at 6:30.
Thank you. That amendment and that note to change, a motion to approve?
Motion.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you. A roll call, please.
Paul,
Yes.
Diane,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
Kevin, Kevin Kyra,
Yes.
Kate Bissell,
Yes.
Stacy,
Yes.
Christine Holloran,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes.
Dennis,
yes.
Susan, Susan Inman,
Yes.
Paul Melagrani,
I'll abstain, I wasn't present.
okay, David Ragsdale, you seconded,
Yes.
Marianne,
Yes.
Craig,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Justin,
Yes.
Dr. Brand,
Yes.
and yes to myself.
Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
Excuse me, Vice Chair.
Right.
Apologies, I'm late. Michael Comosio. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for being here. The third item tonight is the approval of invoices. As always, as we've been doing these more routinely of meetings of late. Warrant number 9. Any comments on this, Julie?
Yeah, I'm just gonna read these off. We worked with the Finance Working Group prior to this meeting. This month's invoice for SMMA for services rendered in the month of February for $7,500. As well as Doran Whittier's invoice for $31,500, totaling $39,000. And Susan Inman will make the recommendation.
After review of the Finance Working Group, I would like to move warrant number 9 for payment at $39,000. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions?
Yeah, this is Kevin Kyra, is there a breakdown as to what we're spending of the $31,500, what's been done for that?
Every month, Doran Whittier presents me with their invoice, which also has an attachment that was sent to, I believe, to the Finance Working Group. If not, I can send it forward. It gives a list of all of the tasks they performed. We use that as, to submit our MSBA OPM monthly report. So we do have that list of items that were performed.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I don't know if any other member would like to see it. We've been billed $31,500 for the past several months and haven't seen what they've done to earn that money, so it'd be good to see.
Yeah, we can include that. I will have Sarah send that out to the committee so they can see that list of items that were performed for this month. And moving forward, we'll include that.
Okay, unless there's anything
Thank you.
further on warrants, what's that?
Yep. If there's no further questions or discussion, roll call for approval of warrant number 9. Thank you. Paul?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Greg Bendel?
Yes.
Kevin?
I'm gonna abstain.
Kate?
Yes.
Stacy?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
David Ragsdale?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes, in a second.
Justin?
Yes.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
And yes to myself.
Great, thank you, everyone. Moving on this evening to item number 4, and really the heart of tonight's meeting is the evaluation matrix discussion. A lot of information to come in just a short moment here. But considerable work has been done over the last, continues to be done over the last number of weeks leading up to tonight. Doran Whittier, our leadership working group and SMMA have been meeting, continue to meet regularly, weekly, and actually on a couple of occasions more than weekly to review the work. Just as a reminder for all on the committee, as well as those that may be watching and following this at home, we have a large number of options right now for this school building project, and that is both by design and necessity. As a point of reminder for everyone, we signaled very clearly to the Massachusetts School Building Authority that we had an interest in exploring school consolidation, but with that exploration, we were also required, the town, the district, was also required to look at a whole host of options. Those options again include pre-KK that would just focus on the Wildwood. They also include combining or consolidating the pre-KK up to grade 3, which of course would be the Wildwood and the Woburn Street. And they also include pre-K to 5, which include of course the Wildwood, Woburn, and the North. And so at this still relatively early stage of the process, our design team, Doran Whittier, the design team that the town hired through that bid process and under the direction of SMMA, has been actively exploring a whole host of options. And tonight they're going to walk us through in a lot finer detail what these options entail. But as you'll also hear very quickly, we need to narrow these down. There are just simply far too many options. And so it's with that, with a more fine sort of lens to look at how we can do that. And a lot of work has been done to date. And so with all of that said, the information is included in a presentation that they'll walk through this evening. As always, we'll make this accessible to anyone who wishes to look at this, even if you're not a member of the building committee. I'll just put a plug in for that we continue to amass all of the materials and all of the information that's associated with this project on the district's website for anyone in the community who's interested in following along. With that, Ronnie, thanks for being here and good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Brand. So the goal of today is to evaluate the options that we have in front of us. And we're going to evaluate those against the established criteria that we reviewed last month and identify the highest performing alternatives to be studied further in the next phase.
Ronnie, is there any particular numbers that we need to get down or options?
We'll get there.
Perfect. Okay.
So on the screen, we have 15 of the 18 total options presented to date. And we also have 3 repair-only options that are not depicted in the chart. And for those in the room, as you can see, we've brought boards so that if we want to look at an option in more detail or compare options, we have the opportunity to do that. It's a little easier in person than it is on the screen. For anybody that's at home, on the committee, you were sent a packet, and you will have access to all of the options if you had printed them out. So at the end of this phase, the committee is tasked with assembling a short list of 18 options to study further in the next phase. MSBA requires the short list to include at least one alternative from each grade configuration, at least one alternative from each of the following across all grade configurations, and that being a renovation addition and a new construction option. And then all repair alternatives would have to move forward into the next phase, and the next phase is called the preferred schematic, or as we'll sometimes refer to it as PSR. In February, we discussed the 8 categories to evaluate, and based on the opinions surrounding the town hall site that we have heard from this committee, the leadership working group, and from participants in the community forum, we included a criteria to capture limitations and restrictions for a site. We propose a 9th category titled Restrictions and Future Uses. 2 criteria are included: minimal restrictions for development, considering the potential impact of Article 97, municipal open space designations, wetlands, and wellhead protection zones. We initially discussed that this would be part of the site criteria, and in looking at the discussions and reviewing the conversations that have happened, we thought it would make sense to give it its own category. The second consideration is the potential use of a site for the community in the future if it was selected for a project. So we've added that so that there are now 2 criteria in this category. Each site has designations that can place restrictions on the site, and so those were scored as part of this category. Some of the designations or site restrictions are more stringent than others, such as wetlands or Article 97, as both can impact the project schedule. All the sites have municipal open space designations, and that's one of the things that would require a vote at town meeting when we look to approve this project. So now let's get to the crux of it, which is the matrix. Okay, don't bother squinting because you won't be able to read it. I know it looks like an eyesore right now, but we wanted to just give you an idea of the process that we went through, but we are gonna go through this and make it more digestible for you in a moment. So we're sharing this just to give you an idea because Dorn Witter took the first step of populating the scores for each criteria for each alternative study. So 18 options, over 40 criteria. Someone could do the math, but it was a lot of options and criteria to score. So this is the first iteration, and we're gonna look at each of the options to evaluate it without consideration of cost. In 2 weeks, we will come back. By then, we'll have the cost, and we will see how that impacts the decisions of the scoring. So the top row on the matrix, it reflects the options with the enrollment size and the site location. The left column lists the criteria grouped into the 9 categories. And each category was scored and was weighted equally since the number of criteria varied in each of the categories. The colors graphically differentiate the score ranges. Red and orange are less favorable, and the greens are more favorable. For some of you in the room here where the lighting is a little skewing, it's red, orange, yellow, a lighter green, and a darker green. So in the category of education, all of the addition and renovations and new construction options achieved targets and scored higher. Repair-only options have no improvements educationally or programmatically, such as, for example, space configuration to align with the district's educational plan, and so therefore would score lower. Targets in the site category included maximizing open green space and play areas, separation of bus and vehicle loops with plenty of space for queuing on site, access to municipal utilities, for example, at North and Town Hall, sufficient parking for faculty and staff with the ability to double as event parking, located in closer proximity to sending students, and an appropriate scale and placement of the building in respect to the site and the area. We've already reviewed the restrictions and future use previously, but more or less, if there was more restrictions on the site, it would score poor, and if there were less restrictions on site, it would be more favorable. The district and the town view the school building as a community resource. Separation of public and private spaces are a minimum target to maintain building security. A high school competition-sized gymnasium was in response to the town, district, and community feedback that additional gym space is needed for the significant number of programs that serve the community after hours. The least favorable is to maintain the status quo with no improvements. Typically, new construction is more efficient to achieve targets. Renovations can be more challenging and cost more to achieve similar results when it comes to sustainability. Orienting classrooms along the east-west axis allows for ideal daylighting conditions with northern and southern exposure. For example, screens for shading would address glare on the southern light. Diffused northern light glare isn't a concern, so shading isn't really is required as much. And then east and west daylighting require more strategies to control, so they're not as ideal. Larger sites have more opportunities to consider geothermal wells as an option as well. Regarding construction logistics, with any construction project, we want to limit disruption to students, staff, and daily operations. The unoccupied sites, such as Town Hall and Wildwood, are ideal as they are most straightforward. An occupied site that does not impact the existing building, such as a new school on the north site, is also favorable. The Woburn Street site, due to its linear configuration and significant grade changes, is more challenging. Additions, renovations are in close proximity to existing buildings and can be more disruptive than new construction options. A repair-only option for an occupied site fails to meet the targets with more phases to complete portions of a building at any given time and would require temporary space. For consolidation, in simplest terms, it's the most favorable in that it will serve more students in a shorter time frame. A larger student population will generate more traffic to a location, and a larger site can absorb the increase in traffic on site with circulation and queuing length. In the total time category, the target is to address all the needs of the pre-K-5 students with one project. Understanding that if one project is not viable for the town, at minimum, addressing the needs in 2 projects would be the next preferred. The least desired option would require 3 projects, as it would have the longest duration of all the scenarios. So now that we've reviewed the scoring of the criterion categories, let's review the preliminary results for each enrollment. This is the pre-K evaluation matrix. We're comparing the options to each other. And as you can see here, I'll try to give you a snapshot of why some scored higher and some scored lower. In education, the repair-only option scores lower as compared to the ad reno and new constructions, in that no space improvements, educational improvements have been made. Regarding site, Wildwood generally scores lower as a smaller site with limited solutions for parking and circulation, which in turn limits open green space and play areas. It also would require a septic system. For restrictions, most of the sites are relatively favorable, except the Town Hall site because of the Article 97 designation. From a community access, and spaces to meet the targets at the larger Town Hall site, we found that to be the most beneficial. I skipped over sustainability, I apologize. Repair and ad renos, they, as discussed previously, would score lower because it's harder to achieve the same goals. Regarding consolidation, the difference between both sites is that the town hall is not already a school site, and it's on a major artery for the town. Time to completion, it's the longest duration, as 3 projects would be required to address the needs of all the pre-K 5 students. So once we've tallied the scores, a new pre-KK at Wildwood scored the highest of the alternatives that were considered for this configuration. Also to note, the repair-only option would be required to move forward into the next phase. And that would also serve as a baseline, and that will be true for pre-KK, pre-K 3, and pre-K 5. I'm gonna pause there, just because I know this is a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions before we start with pre-K to 3?
Ronnie, can I just ask, if you don't mind going back to that last slide?
Sure.
On the document, the version we were provided on the new town hall site under sustainability, we had an 8.9 and you have a 10.0. I'm guessing it may be a typo. And I just want to make sure the correct version is shared.
Our handouts also say 8.9.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a typo because it is the lighter shade of green.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, I will check that. Any other questions before we
Let's
move
go
on?
back to the dashes. So we have to carry forward the one on the left being the repair,
Correct.
and then you're picking the highest scoring.
Well,
Right,
not
is-
so much that we're picking it, we're just identifying it that
Identifying
right
the
now it
next
is
highest
scored
score,
the
okay.
highest. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? For the pre-K 3 enrollment, for education, again, all of the options scored high except for the repair only. Regarding the site, Wildwood generally scored lower as it's smaller, and now we're trying to put even more students on the site. Of the 3 sites presented here, Woburn Street has the least number of restrictions on it, so it was more favorable. From a community access, Woburn scored slightly higher than Town Hall since the design is slightly more compact. The Town Hall in this scenario has 4 wings versus Woburn Street that has 2, for anybody that's looking at their options. From sustainability, the orientation of the building impacted the scores for some of these. Regarding consolidation, Woburn was centrally located for sending areas as compared to the other sites. And time to completion, 2 projects likely required addressing the needs of all pre-K 5 students. However, to help differentiate in this scenario, because we have more options, newer construction would have a slightly shorter duration than the other alternatives, so they scored slightly higher.
On the logistics, so the add Woburn for both new and add Reno, is that the complexity of more phasing?
Yes.
Part of the bill, okay.
On the new sustainability at Woburn, what would have made that 11.2? What was missing from that? We can get there later if you need to.
Yeah, if you can save your question, we'll go back to it when I could pull up the chart. Oh, I could tell you actually, so the new at Woburn, the sustainability is higher, versus being a full, like giving it
Yeah, exactly.
the highest.
Yeah,
Well, the orientation impacted the score,
orientation, okay. Yep.
but that's why it was higher than the others, so I would have to just look
Okay.
to see. Part of it might have had to do with the fact that because the site is on septic, there wouldn't be as much space for the geothermal wells
Sure.
because we need the leach fields, and as we also need to have a reserve area.
Makes sense.
So that's likely the reason.
Ronnie, I was surprised that on the education side, that the ad renos scored exactly as high as the new construction, that there was no benefit of new construction over ad reno on that, on that scale. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so it's a little tricky because under education, there's, I believe, 12 criteria. And so even if it scored lower or higher in one or the other, at the end it balanced out. But the reality is, with the ad renos, really a small portion of the buildings are retained. And so in those buildings, we were still able to establish the same relationships as the new construction. So overall, they are still accomplishing the same goals, not enough to ding it because it's an ad reno, if you will. But we could look back at the criteria in detail to verify if maybe there was a way we could differentiate them and look at the scoring again, but.
No, I mean, I
Yeah.
think it's, I don't think necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's a positive thing that the ad reno is able to still meet, at least in that category, most of the benefits of,
Right.
Of the new construction.
And our goal with any design, whether it's ad reno or new construction, is to try to accomplish all of the goals. And so we really try hard to do that, so.
And on the restrictions where the town hall, everything scores well except the town hall site, is that solely like the Article 97 issue? I think you were saying
So
that was
there's-
partly about the construction, the layout of the school, how it was spread out into the, the four wings. Now, my understanding was that was possible, like if I remember that those, all of those designs were fewer stories than at the alternative locations, essentially because of the size, that like you can spread out. But if that's a disadvantage, that because it's spread out, now you have restrictions about what else can be used for the site. Are there corresponding, or I should guess, countervailing benefits to that design that would that shows up elsewhere in the matrix?
So the design of the 4 stories versus, or the 4 wings versus the 2 wings was actually not part of restrictions. The restrictions have to do with the limitations with Article 97 on that site, and then the proximity to the wetlands and the wetland buffers, so it scored lower. And then it also has to do with the location of the site, being that it's more centrally located in town for future use. That site would then be taken offline for the community to be able to use it as something else.
Okay,
If-
so
if
it's
the
those
school was-
external factors.
Yeah,
It's not
so,
building
yeah.
design.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when we tallied up the scores, new pre-K 3 at Woburn Street scored the highest of all the alternatives. And again, the repair-only option would also have to move forward as a baseline. Before I move forward, are there any other questions for this pre-K 3 alternatives?
Hey, one quick thing.
Sure.
I mentioned it the other day in the meeting. So knowing the topography of the Woburn Street and the different levels, and then all the ledge that's there, because we have radon systems in there, that's not factored in there right now because you wouldn't know the cost. You'd have a minimal coverage of what's underground. And that could be a lot bigger or smaller. But I would think that multi-levels of that property would be I'm shocked that it scores as high because of the way the property is set up.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, we haven't done any exploratory work at any of the sites, so we do understand, though, that there's going to be cut, there's going to be fill, there's the potential for unforeseen conditions, and so we do have to account for that, and it's via an allowance. And right now, this is at such a high level that we take that into consideration when the pricing is done. We haven't created a criteria for it because we really don't have anything to fully substantiate it because we don't have the exploratory results because they haven't been done yet.
Yeah.
So, But we do factor that in when we're looking at cost, knowing that, you know, working with a site that has significant slope will have a lot more site work involved. And so when we look at the cost estimates, we would see that the site work would probably be a lot more at Woburn versus, say, Town Hall site. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move to pre-K 5. So with pre-K 5, again, education, similar to what we've seen in the previous two grade configurations. Regarding site, the larger sites better accommodate this enrollment just due to the sheer volume of students and faculty that will be on the site. And regarding site amenities as well as circulation and parking, so larger sites tend to score better. Woburn and Wildwood scored lower since they are also on septic. So that was another factor here because the septic fields would be even larger to accommodate this population. Regarding restrictions, of all of these sites, North actually scores slightly higher, just because it has the least restrictions on it compared to the other sites. From a community standpoint, the ad reno option scored slightly higher, and this just had to do with the direct access to the public spaces from the exterior, and also that libraries just happen to be located on the main levels, where in the new construction options, the library is actually on the second level, even though it could still be secured for community access. It is on the second level versus the first level. So I know it's kind of splitting hairs, but when we're trying to differentiate between sites and options and alternatives, we were trying to find different ways to differentiate them, and that was something that stood out. Regarding sustainability, the orientation of the building, again, impacted the scores here. For logistics, the size of the building was favored on unoccupied sites, so Town Hall and Wildwood would score the best from a logistics standpoint. The reality is when we are doing any of these projects on a occupied site, the new addition or new construction would be built, and then the population that is on that site would be moved into the new spaces. So for example, if we're talking about the North Intermediate site, 4th and 5th grade would move into the new construction, and then the existing building would have to be demolished. Site work needs to be completed because at that point, the site is not ready to accommodate 750 plus students. So the phasing in that makes it a little bit trickier, and so therefore they scored slightly lower. From a consolidation standpoint, obviously this is the largest population, and so therefore you'll see there's a lot of greens here. For time to completion, this is one project. Again, a lot of greens are seen. And the new construction options tend to be slightly shorter in duration, so they were more favorable. So when we tally these up, the new pre-K 5 at North scored the highest. And again, the repair only. Now, one thing that hasn't scored the highest in any of the categories for pre-K, pre-K 3, or pre-K 5 is an ad reno option, which will also need to move forward. And when we looked at the tally of all of them for the different grade configurations, the ad reno at North was the one that actually scored the highest, and likely it's because it responds to all of the students that we're considering here. So this is the first iteration. Like I said, we have not looked at this with cost, but it is to give us an idea of where the options are standing with each other against the goals that we've set and the targets that we've set through visioning and the guiding principles. And so right now, the 7 alternatives that you're seeing on the screen are the ones that are favorable to move forward based on the scoring of where we are right now. And that's what I have, but now we're curious to hear from the committee if this is, are you surprised by the results? Is this what you were thinking? Is there something missing that you thought should be still considered? And because at the end of the day, you know, we will again revisit all of this in 2 weeks, but 2 weeks from there, after the community forum, we are going to, as a committee, have to shortlist the options and approve that to move forward into the next phase and submit that to MSBA. So we just wanted to gauge, based on what you're seeing, if this is where you thought it would be, if you're surprised. How's everyone feeling? I know it's a lot of information.
Ronnie, just before we open up to
Sure.
questions, could I just ask you to, once again, for everyone's sake, to clarify the definition that you use and/or MSBA uses for repair only, and how that compares or contrasts to the repair ad. Could you sort of walk us through that in terms of what, I'm thinking in my head of what often people will talk about for their home, and they may be renovating it,
Right.
but that may not be doing anything more than modernizing it or replacing a roof. Or can you just sort of walk us through what you're looking at and MSBA is looking at in terms of the comparison and contrast between those two?
Sure. So for the repair-only option, so if we take a step back and we recall the summer, all of the consultants and the architectural team, we went to all of the sites and visited all the buildings and put together a capital improvements list. And more or less that is responding to the needs of each of the buildings to bring them up to current codes. It's updating the buildings and making them more efficient. So, for example, replacing the HVAC systems and updating those. If the roof needs to be done, accounting for roof work. North had the windows done, but the other schools have not. And if they were going to be continued to be utilized as a community resource, then at some point the windows would have to get done. So all of those to-do items are accumulated in what's called the repair option. What doesn't happen in the repair option is what you would otherwise, what would happen in a renovation option is renovating to meet the standards of the educational vision and plan of the district. So space modifications, and enlarging the school with an addition, those fall out of the category of repair. And so the repair is used as a baseline. So for right now, we have to carry the repair forward, but it would not be responding to the educational benefits that you would see in the other options.
So if we're lacking classrooms, for example, that are not to the square footage of what's considered appropriate in the current time period, they might be shiny and new, but they won't be changed in terms of their footprint for
Correct.
repair only.
Yeah, the building footprint would stay the same. We
Right.
wouldn't account for additions, other than if for one of the two-story, like North or Woburn, where we might need to add a small addition for an elevator to make it accessible.
Accessible,
Something like that, yeah.
But the renovation, if we currently don't have, say, appropriate space for occupational therapy or physical therapy or rooms such as that, the repair only, they're not going to appear. They're not going to be added in.
Correct.
Renovation will help conform that building to meet our current needs and what we've identified through our visioning process, right?
Right. So the reason why we don't have a renovation-only option is we understood that the current space would not be adequate to fulfill the full vision of the educational plan. And so therefore, it wouldn't have been a viable option. It would more or less be the repair-only option, so they're one and the same.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the simplest form of that is repair is to extend the useful life of the building by bringing, most of the infrastructure up to code standards, but it does not touch at all any of the layouts of existing spaces, any additional programs that you may need in the future. And by default, they're usually used as a benchmark comparison to other options that are meeting your educational needs. So you and the public have a general sense of, what is the magnitude of what we're getting into on a project? The big difference is if you played out to try and advance a repair option as your choice to move forward, that becomes very difficult in the fact that in order for MSBA to support your project, you have to identify a project that meets your educational needs of the future. By definition, a repair project doesn't, unless you guys say that, our buildings today meet what we need in the future and they house all of our programs, which we know that they don't. It would be a very difficult option to move forward by a build. So it's usually just there for a benchmarking from a cost standpoint and a logistics standpoint and how you would actually extend the life of that building.
So repair is really modernization.
Correct.
Correct.
It's also conveying there's a cost to doing nothing.
Exactly.
Ronnie, if I could, I think, just for future reference, the new at Wildwood, I think those numbers are the ad rental from Wildwood within the boxes, I believe. I think the total is 56.2.
The numbers?
Yeah,
Oh.
just the numbers in there, just for future, so that you.
Thank you.
So again, Ronnie, just to clarify, and your team, you're, as we open this up to the group for questions, whether here in the room or at home, is just to get a sort of an overall sense of the reactions to the matrix, the application of the matrix to these options, and where this, at this early juncture, is steering us. But just to clarify, this is by no means a sort of a final direction here. But Julie can add in, if you would, as the town's owner's project manager, in terms of what's really being asked here, and then where this goes next, if you could.
Yeah, so this was done with, Dorian Whittier took their first stab at this by putting some numbers on, being objective. By no means does this mean that this has to be the scores. If there's anything on here that anyone sees that they'd like clarification, they'd like us to, maybe review, we'd be happy to look at these individually. If anyone is opposed to the scoring that is currently being shown. Like Ronnie said earlier, we're gonna do this again in 2 weeks on the 20th, with costs associated. So we're gonna see something a little bit different, because now you'll have a dollar amount. And that dollar amount really is just a square foot amount. It's not, it doesn't get into all the bells and whistles that would be in, a new building, a renovation, an ad reno. But it gives us a good benchmark on how we're gonna, where we're landing for costs. So does anyone in the room or anyone on the call have any questions about the scoring itself, and, would like to look at, any of these in particular so that they could understand it better?
If time allows, I would like to visit for the pre-K through 5 option, the 2 new ones that are at opposing sites, one at the north and one at the Woburn. And their scoring is both relatively high, and there is a lot of the scores are relatively close as well. And what would make one a little bit more beneficial over the other between the sites? I mean, I understand that the Woburn site might have some of the grading, and is that what's causing the score to be slightly lower? Or is there some other factor that is?
Sure. So the new at Woburn Street, one of the things is at the pre-K 5, it has the larger gymnasium. So instead of a 6,000 square foot gymnasium, it's a 12,000 square foot gymnasium. And to fit it on the site, on the northern half of the site, it was going to impact the existing gymnasium of Woburn. And so it was going to require early demolition of that gym space.
Okay.
And so therefore, it impacted the existing school and the existing operations. The other factor is any of the alternatives at Woburn. It's very tricky from a logistical standpoint because of the way that there's 2 entries into the site. And so once we were figuring out area for the construction site, lay down, all of that, it really impacts the circulation around the building, and it's actually very close, right, to the existing building. And so At Woburn, we also have to consider like a temporary parking area, probably on the lower field somewhere, and circulation to make that school remain operational while the construction was happening. So that was one of the factors.
Okay. Not detrimental, but it seems like they're both manageable risks in order to take on. I mean, in some regards, I would like to see both of them move forward since they're both scoring relatively high in comparison to some of the other ones. And just to understand where cost-wise they land based on the phasing and some of the grade changes. I understand that the gymnasium might be part of a phasing instead of where in North you don't have to, but I'd still like to see where it would land as far as cost goes before we make a determination.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear on that. I just want to make sure I am clear. We're gonna receive costs on every
them.
one of the options. And we'll be presenting those in 2 weeks. So although Doran Whittier has gone through this process and has shown you the 6 or 7 that they are saying are most favorable at this point, we're gonna do the entire exercise over again, and we may get a different result when there's cost associated.
No, absolutely understandable. I was just more, I don't want to kind of deter people from the Woburn site for a few points. I wanted to understand what was making the delta between the two.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that discussion, Vivian, that, what you get with the Woburn Street option is far less parking, less fields, less site circulation, compared to the North Street site. So the delta in the points themselves may not fully reflect sort of what you're getting, even though the buildings are very similar, the site conditions are very different in terms of what's achievable on each one of those two pieces of property.
Okay.
Thanks, Jason.
Are we able to achieve geothermal at both North and Woburn in this pre-K through 5?
So this one is, it's very challenging at Woburn because of the size of the septic. Right now, we have shown, and we could probably see it better on the boards, but the septic is actually underneath the playground area, that leach field, and then we also have to have a reserve area of equal size. So that pretty much takes over the playground area, which is south of the building. So then we're really limited on where the geothermal wells could go, and then it becomes more costly if we're trying to put them, for example, underneath parking or something.
So then can we dive into how they're both scoring the same?
From sustainability, they're both at 10.
Sorry, on sustainability, my bad. Yep. I would expect North to be a little bit higher than Woburn.
Is the goal of the project to carry forward a geothermal well or arrays to reach net zero?
I would like to see that an option. And we've only talked one time sustainability, and I think we'll talk more when we've narrowed down sites.
Right.
I'd like to keep that as an option as many places as possible, because that's gonna be cheaper than other
Long-term.
non-gas systems if we can't use gas.
And it does factor into our credits, right?
Yeah, that's one of them, and then there's the other one.
Julie or
Percent
Ronnie,
Points from MSP, yeah.
the question of
Initial cost of
factoring into
geothermal will be a
credits,
much
is that,
higher number than.
Right, you're pre-buying your energy.
Right.
can we do, I was, along that same line, can you just for the group, for what MSBA expects or requires rather around sustainability, could you just expand a little bit on that? And the question around credits, does this help greatly in terms of the credits, the sustainability piece and what we're?
So, so MSBA has changed their requirements, right, to obtain additional funding. And so we've talked about it in the sustainability group as well as in this committee, that there have been changes. So the more efficient the building is, and for example, if it's net zero or net zero ready, it will allow the project to achieve the the points that it needs to potentially receive additional funding. And so it's just, the more efficient and the more sustainable the building is, the more likely it is to be able to have access to that additional funding. That's kind of the short of it.
How many schools in the past couple of years have you done geothermal at?
1, 2, 3.
Out of how many?
3 out of 4 that are in the current kind of batch going through. So the big push is to go all electric. Geothermal on the return is proving out to be beneficial with the impetus of third-party money coming from the government to be able to make those work. Without that, it's a much longer payback period. So the goal is right now, we haven't decided kind of what route the project needs to take and what our goals are as a group with sustainability. What we're trying to do is make sure that we don't rule out options that provide all those benefits. So we're thinking about all these options and the fact that we do need potentially to have a geothermal field. And in this particular option, where would we locate it? And you can start sliding a piece of paper at this conceptual level between 2 new options on different sites on sustainability, to your question. And it really could be slightly, the way we could fit on the site, the building orientation to get it, the solar orientation, the way we want it is slightly different on one than it is another, so it scores a little bit less. Mm-hmm. When we do look at the availability for space for geothermal, when we're looking at, we just don't have enough real estate of green space, so we know it's going to be more costly to put that under parking lots and be able to build structures that you need to be able to maintain those well. So some of that will show up in the cost differential. So we're just trying to make sure that we're leaving all avenues potentially open to you for meeting as much sustainability as we can. And certainly there are limiting factors on different sites. You get down to Wildwood, and we're putting a big building on that, and it becomes a postage stamp, and everything's going to have to be underground, and under the building to be able to have those same features as you would on a larger site. So those are the big differences. We haven't seen any showstoppers out there, with the exception of Wildwood, in putting a large building on that, being able to hit some of our sustainability goals. But right now it's trying to keep as many options open with the ones that we move forward to be able to hit those goals. And so at this level, it's very hard to compare new here versus new here, but there are some factors that do stick out at this level. And that's what you're seeing as a differentiation in some of the scoring.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, under sustainability, so because there's only 2 criteria within that category, North scored a 5 and then a 4, where Woburn scored a 4 and then a 5, and that's why they're actually coming out the same, but they didn't score the same in each of the categories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other questions that folks have for Ronnie or her team?
I think, Glenn, back to your first question was, how, as a gut check, how does this feel overall? Mm-hmm. I think it landed pretty much where I thought it would, where I expected it to. When you look at each of the configuration groupings, the repair only versus the new, everything scored in the succession or the ascending order that I kind of thought it would. So to me, nothing feels off balance.
Thanks.
It does seem very consistent with what we've heard since day one, right? Through visioning process, we heard a lot of a big push towards consolidation, something people are definitely interested in. We also heard some concerns about the town hall site, which I think are reflective in some of the scoring that's in here. I do think it gives you a pretty broad range of options to move into the next phase to study deeper. It has, as it stands right now, without us looking at the cost, pre-K to 5 with an addition renovation seems to make sense to me, and new, right? It solves that consolidation issue. It's the fastest way you can get to taking care of all of the pre-K to 5 students at once. I do think it's important to move forward we have to, with pre-K to 3 and pre-K to K. And it also gives you certainly going to be some different cost price points to be able to look at in each of these categories. So I think you're covering all of your bases pretty well to move a good group of options into the next phase and not really losing anything that I can see right now. You've got a good batch to move forward and study further.
Other comments or questions?
Agreed. I think it's pretty intuitive with what we can see with our own eyes and the way that it's broken out. It's not this is generally, it falls in line with what I had expected. And again, it's well organized, so thank you.
A question on the cost analysis for each. It's going to be a bigger view, correct? We're not gonna really have a very big deep dive into what the cost would be for any of these, correct? It's more of a rough estimate?
So these will be conceptual level estimates based on square footages and assumptions that we've made equally across each of the options, right? We're always trying to compare apples to apples when we put the costs together without having a lot of the detail between the two. So you can be able to compare the options relative to each other. So they are going to be conceptual in nature. They'll be based on square foot. We are taking into account a lot of the detail with the site development costs and the differentiation between each of the sites. And there is, a pretty considerable amount of backup information. We did put an outline spec together for all of these things, so we'll be able to provide that information, so you'll have the detail that we have when we're reviewing these estimates for this level.
Will you be able to make any assumptions about MSBA credits so that we can get a ballpark for what we would be responsible for?
Not yet. I think we're still gonna look at this as overall, and you'll see two numbers, right? You're gonna see just a hard construction cost and what that contract would look like, plus all the soft costs. So everything else in addition to that, fees and permitting and furnishings and technology and all of that. So you'll have this kind of soup to nuts project cost as comparisons.
Okay.
But at this level, it would be more of a percentage base.
Yep, that's what I was
Since
thinking.
Correct.
we don't have all of the requirements based on which site is selected on some of the soft costs.
Yeah.
About the costing as well, would it be fair to say that even though we obviously don't have everything we just said, all the details, the nitty-gritty that would be needed to really fine-tune like a precise cost estimate, that based on the assumptions that we are working with, that there's no particular reason, for example, to think that when we do get a more accurate cost estimate, that it would necessarily be higher or lower, that like we're trying to pinpoint something that that is as accurate as possible based on what we know, and or is it something that like this is what we can say given what we know, but inevitably it'll be higher once we get like the details out, or is it just as likely to be maybe a little bit lower, a little bit higher? Like what has the experience been in terms of, obviously they can never be 100% accurate, but when the when the real numbers do come in,
Yeah.
do they tend to be higher, lower, or roughly the same?
Yeah, I think what we're looking to do here is to provide you with kind of an order of magnitude, so you can see and feel the difference between pre-KK, pre-K3, and pre-K to 5 relative to each of those options in those bundles. So whether we finish and conclude that phase and move forward and we do the same exercise again at PSR with much more detail, they will go up and down relative to each other based on the assumptions that we've learned in investigating and getting more detail on that information. To tell you it's always going up or it's always going down from the numbers that we start, it's a mixed bag. I think we do the best we can at this level to try and understand. Our cost estimator has been working with us for 20 years, and they've seen us at this level, the cartoon sketches and what we come out with at the other end, so they know a lot about kind of how that progresses. But I think you're gonna get a pretty fair representation, order of magnitude of where these are gonna be at price points for the different configurations.
So say, for sake of argument, these 7 get moved on. You do another cost estimate on all 7 of those, is that accurate? And then, once that's done, we come up with the preferred option from there?
Correct. We're going to be developing the detail on the design of each of these options that move forward, and working with the school administration and the leadership team that we have been is refining the options that we have now to get more detail in them and to do more investigative work on the different sites to try and get a finer point when we get to the PSR estimating stage, because you will be going from these 7, if these are the ones that move forward, down to one option that we're going to be proceeding with in schematic design. So our goal is to get a level of detail, a whole category ahead and through this next module with MSBA than the level of detail we have in these estimates. So your confidence level should be going up every time we proceed in getting a new estimate.
Will the initial estimate be provided as a range?
We'll see after we review with our estimator and kind of the confidence level and the variability of that. And so we may come back with, here's the kind of midpoint, and it could be, 5% range on each of these numbers. And that way you'll probably see some overlap, I would assume, in some of the new costs versus additions and renovations. But that's a whole nother subject that we can get into to try and fine tune what does that actually mean, those differences in cost.
I was gonna ask the range question, sorry. If the estimator is gonna put a range on it and it's the same for everyone, it might be less valuable, but if there's certain reasons that they'd have a tighter or wider range for different criteria, that might be valuable.
Correct.
So that's probably part of the discussion.
Exactly.
And if you don't mind refreshing my memory on who the two cost estimators are, your cost estimator and the check estimator?
AM&C and AM Fogarty.
Okay.
And for the cost, is this only looking at cost of construction and sort of finishing up the project, or is there any look to ongoing cost of maintaining and
This
operating the building?
This first round is going to be looking at construction and project costs. We will eventually, as we get finer detail into these options, start developing what the operations costs are going to be based on the systems that we've included in there. So this first round, we won't be going there yet, just because we don't have enough information to develop that.
Okay, but later on, like some of the limitations of some of the sites
Yes.
will that will affect the ongoing operational costs going
Correct.
forward.
As do some of the important decisions about, what is the infrastructure that we're putting in there for, heating systems, what are those decisions? So as we make those decisions and get more, right, we're gonna have a finer point on our cost estimate. And it'll allow you to be able to help decide on some of those systems, what is going into the project, what the returns are on some of those investments.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Oh,
Question maybe for Julie. I'm hesitant, I know we have to go through this exercise, but when we start talking costs, the community at large are gonna latch on to numbers. So, to Vivian's point, if we could do a range would be more of an ideal scenario. I'm just concerned that people aren't gonna understand that this is a, high level, high cost. It's just people latch on to what they hear first. That's my concern. If we could get a range, I think it would be beneficial for the community at large.
And we need to make it clear that that's not the impact to the town's wallet, that that's before
Well,
any
you
MSBA
can't-
credits.
Because you can't do that yet because you don't know what MSBA is gonna reimburse us. I mean, that would be a deep dive.
And you
When we
can't
get
say how
further on.
much, but you can
Right.
certainly tell them that it's before any credits.
Correct.
Yes. So, yes, Marianne, we hear you. I mean, I think it's definitely worth exploring before we present information to the public. So we're open to that option.
Also, one of the things, we'll be presenting construction cost and project cost individually for these, but we're also gonna be looking at the bigger picture, right? Because if you decide a pre-KK option is something that's interested in to move forward, right? We still wanna look at apples to apples cost. So if we're only doing Wildwood, right, what is left to be done at
Yes.
North and Woburn, right? And you add those three things up, that's a cost for that particular option to get to the same place you do at pre-K5. So that narrows the field a little bit, so we'll be presenting it both ways.
Love it.
okay, thanks, Lee. We go right into, really with that, the next part of the agenda around next steps. We're gonna combine next steps and schedule update. And I think, Ronnie, you're taking us through.
Sure. So we've sort of talked about this already, but in 2 weeks, March 20th, we'll be back with the matrix and the costs that are associated with each of the alternatives as discussed. And at that meeting, we'll look to do a preliminary shortlist of the options again, see if any opinions have changed. And then on March 28th, there's a community forum that's scheduled. At that time, we will share all of the information with the community and look for feedback Again, we can use Mentimeter. I think it was a valuable tool in the previous forum to gather input from the community and see where they were with the process as well. And then we would return a week later, April 3rd, and at that meeting, again, we're going to finalize the short list of options from the many to the few. And we, at that time, will also be looking to approve submission of this PDP to the MSBA. So,
Can we just clarify the format for the community forum, the next one, March 28th?
I believe our intent was to do the community forum in person here in the large instructional space. So,
And will that include costs?
yes,
yes.
that's the only meeting that we have before we have to make the decision. So yes, it'll include everything.
Ronnie, if I could just ask Dr. Brand, it's not on this list of next steps, but we have a meeting that's not school building committee coming up with the school committee. Maybe you could describe a little bit about that, Dr. Brand.
Thank you, Jason. I was going to do that. So one other thing that we mentioned before, another parallel piece that's developing is what's called the educational plan. It's a requirement by the Mass School Building Authority that projects for such as these require totally aside from cost estimation and these kind of metrics that are being evaluated, but what's the intent in the plan for whatever building configuration is going to eventually be advanced? And so there's been a whole parallel track of considerable work and time with SMMA and Doran Whittier and our school administration and school leaders to develop a rather extensive document. This EDGE plan is over 100 pages long. There are a vast number of requirements or expectations that MSBA looks for. And believe it or not, even though we're still at this rather early stage of all of this, we have to submit to them in April this educational plan. And so it puts some pretty strong stakes in the ground around what our intent would be educationally, philosophically, practically speaking, what would be the program that would take place in all three variations, pre-KK, pre-K3, pre-K to 5. It is a document that I think is the only one, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, that doesn't directly have to flow through the building committee, but that's because it's more of it's the educational program, and thus because of that, it's moving its way to the school committee. And although not a requirement under MSBA, we've decided some time ago to take a similar path that other districts do, and we are fully intending to ask the school committee to approve this plan. Think of it sort of like the program of studies in a way that they approve for the high school every year. It is going forward to the school committee at the March 13th meeting as a first read, and then hopefully their approval at the end of the month, the second meeting, and then it'll, as I said, make its way to the MSBA. There have been an awful lot of folks who have been working hard on this, and again, we've worked closely with Jason as well. So we're confident that we have a good, following a template of what's expected for the MSBA, we have a robust plan that should be able to capture all of the possibilities, all of the three building possibilities here. I'll share that with the building committee, this building committee, early next week, so you have a sense of what that plan looks like going forward. Okay.
It is indeed lengthy, I will confirm.
It's lengthy,
with
yes.
Dr. Brand, it is indeed lengthy.
I think that's Mr. Kyra. Is that Mr. Kyra?
Yeah, I just have a question on the community forum on March 28th. That's the beginning of Easter weekend. Do you think you'll get a lot of participation on Holy Thursday? I'm just throwing that out there.
We hope so. The last community forum we did virtually. This one we'd like to do in person because we'd like to be able to show the boards and show the, so that people can walk around and look at them. I think it'll be definitely a good indication moving forward for our next community forum. You know, it's great to be able to have a hybrid option or to do remote or.
No, I'm not saying hybrid option or in-person option. I'm just throwing out the fact that it's the beginning of
The Easter weekend.
Easter weekend, and and a lot of people, may not be available, they're traveling, they're in church, events, on Holy Thursday. I'm just wondering if you'll get the turnout that you think you'll get. Is that a good date to have, or should there be an alternative?
The o-
I'm just
The only
throwing it out.
Yeah, no, I hear you, Kevin, and that's a great point to raise, except that we're running out of dates and days and times as we have to, as a committee, prepare to finalize the short list very soon after. The only other, I think, option would be, if there's any availability in town, would be to do it on the Wednesday prior versus on the Thursday, 28th, do it on the 27th. But other than that, pushing it off, you're shortening the time between us meeting, reviewing, understanding what the community forum kind of provided as a feedback in order for this committee to finalize and submit the short list.
The school committee's meeting on the 27th.
Yes, in
Oh,
addition,
so there you go.
there are various boards in town, so we do have to review that calendar, which is how we ended up with that date in the first place.
One thing I'll add, though, and Mr. Kyer, thank you for raising it. It certainly is a good point. It's hard to schedule anything with just so much activity going on at the town level. But just for a reference sake, you know that the last forum we held was, the community forum was virtual. We had a huge turnout, 80, I think, at the peak. But after we closed that forum, we recorded that and still made it accessible and the opportunity for community members who couldn't attend to provide their feedback through that Mentimeter
Yep.
platform. I don't know if Jason or Ronnie, you recall, but I know, correct me if I'm wrong, we received quite a few additional comments and responses from community members who couldn't attend the forum on the time and date that it was first held, but watched it later and then still submitted their feedback, correct? Jason or Ronnie, you can speak to that?
Yes, exactly right. We had almost as many people participate in the Mentimeter platform after the meeting as we had participate in the meeting live. And so we could certainly construct a format to allow people to provide feedback after the meeting in a similar manner for this upcoming community forum.
And the intention is to have WCTV, I believe, correct, Julie,
Yes.
record that
To
28th.
record it.
So hopefully that's a good workaround for those that might not be able to attend, whether for religious or other reasons that night. We know there's a lot going on in the community and many families with children and such active in other things. So we're always competing to capture attention, and we think that we're finding a way here through this Mentimeter platform, certainly, and again, the partnership of WCTV. Schedule update, we covered next steps and schedule update. Number 7 on the agenda tonight is the SBC Public Relations Working Group update.
We don't have any new updates. I'll be working with some of the community members that hold positions within the community to make sure to get as much information out to the public and as much attendance to the March 28th. So that's our biggest push at the moment.
Can I jump in here for a minute?
Yes, please.
So we had a member of our committee is unable to continue their duties, and that person was on the Public Relations Working Group. And so we are looking for additional volunteers. If anyone would like to help out, and we understand everyone is extremely committed to this group, to other groups within town, but if there's anyone who has some time, whether it's via email, whether it's, to meet in person, please reach out to Vivian to let her know, because she would be happy to add to this group. We are going to be attending the town meeting on May 4th, and we are intending to have a table out in front that has some information provided on the project, and we do need your help. We need help manning that table, being able to talk to the public about where we stand with this project, and Vivian and her group, will be spearheading that. So, just a public plea for help.
Okay, thank you.
To that, if I can interrupt 1 second, I know you said that you had people sign on after after you did the last forum, how many signed on? Does anybody have that number?
I don't have the exact
Did it
number.
80.
Yeah, it was almost double.
It was 80, and then how many were at the forum itself?
73.
Roughly 75.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Does item 8, discussion correspondence and new items? I'll start if there's just for a couple of, the upcoming town meeting was mentioned, and I have reached out to the temporary town manager to speak to those that's necessary to request the opportunity for a presentation on the floor of town meeting. There's a process that the town has for that. So as was mentioned, we will anticipate that ability and possibility to do so. We're hopeful that that will be able to transpire. The other thing that I have done is just to let this committee know is I have extended an invitation to the respective chairs of the Finance Committee as well as the Select Board, and I'm sure we can get on the agenda with the School Committee to provide an update on this project. As everyone knows, we have liaisons from all 3 of those governing bodies on this committee formally, and that was with intent. But we also recognize, certainly I do, that we're at a pretty critical juncture, critical point, not juncture, but critical point and time period over the next number of months, leading to the late September, early fall, where a final decision is going to need to be made. So I think it's important, and if there's an interest by those committees, I'm more than happy to put together sort of a high-level presentation that can bring the other committee members on those 3 committees up to speed with this project. So we don't have dates yet, but I just wanted to share that with this committee tonight. With that said, though, are there any other new items or any other discussion that folks would like to have this evening?
What time will the community engagement be on the 28th?
I want to say it was at 7 o'clock, but I can verify that and have Tracy send a follow-up on that.
Thank you. I'm recruiting.
Thank you.
Community questions, item number 9 tonight. Are there any questions from members of the committee, either here in person or at home? Okay. Public comment. Anyone from the public who might wish to speak this evening? We have no one here in person from those that are at home. Is there anyone on, no, there's no one else? Okay. All right, with that then, next meeting has been mentioned, a couple of upcoming meetings, March 20th, the next meeting of the building committee, this committee that will be meeting, and we are meeting in person?
You can do the same format as this.
Okay. This, I think, hopefully for those at home, seemed to work fairly well, at least from our end it appears such. And the community forum, as mentioned, on March 28th. And so unless there's anything further tonight, thank you, Doran Whittier, for all of your work and your presentation on this. Excitement's building. The options are endless right now, but we'll push this forward, I know. And so with all of that, looking for a motion to adjourn.
Dr. Brand, do we need to vote on that matrix
No.
We do,
that was presented tonight?
Not this evening, we're gonna vote at the next meeting. Oh, I'm sorry, on
Okay.
April 3rd, I'm sorry, let me clarify that. The next meeting, we will show all the cost options, and then on April 3rd, we'll have time to have processed what we have seen, and we'll vote on April 3rd.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn tonight.
Move to adjourn?
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. And roll call.
Paul?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Stacy?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Alice?
Yes.
Dennis?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Craig?
Yes.
Christine?
Yes.
Justin?
Yes.
Dr. Brand?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank
Great.
you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening.